we will finish the symposium with the last presentation to be made by myself and Esen Çağlar. So it sounds a little bit weird, but I would like to introduce myself and then Esen. Having completed my doctoral degree on urbanism at TU Delft, Netherlands, I have been lecturing at the Department of City and Regional Planning at METU, Ankara, as an assistant professor since 2014 as one of the studio coordinators of METU Master of Urban Design program. My research interests involved physical planning and design, urban morphology, and urban design theory and methodology. Then Esen Çağlar, finally, is the managing partner of Policy Analytics Lab. He holds an MPA in International Development from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and AB in Politics and Political Economy from Princeton University. He leads pulse engagements in industrial policy, competitiveness, and regional economic development. Having worked with multilaterals such as UNDP and OECD, he has advised various governments, including those of Turkey, Oman, Palestine, Cyprus, and Ethiopia. He also serves as an adjunct lecturer at Bilkent University since 2006. So let me share our presentation.
We made all of you stand still for more than 7 hours, so
yeah,
feel some empathy for all these industrial workers that we are talking about.
I think it works right now. All right. Within the last talk of the symposium, we would like to share our own studio experience with a general reflection on the issue of designing the next generation of industrial districts. So when sharing our own studio experiments, we will touch upon the big issues a little bit as a kind of introductory framework to set, let's say. So the development of modern capitalism occurred, by the generative relationship between industrialization and urbanization. While the early industrial developments tended to locate in the periphery of the city, then it became more integrated in time, as discussed in the previous lectures. But actually such an integration determined the prevailing reputation of industry, characterized by dust, smoke, and rumble, may be still valid, as also discussed in one of the presentations. So the response of modern urbanism to the capitalist mode of industrialization was still based on a close relationship and integration between production and the living environment. So somehow the city could be envisaged as the industrial complex itself, like in the case of Tony Garnier's model proposal. The early capitalist city was not alone in its genre, actually. Its socialist counterpart was also envisioning industry as the part of the new city, or other way around. The city was the integral part of the industrial developments. The revolution was to suggest its own image, the powerful machine aesthetics, as the constructivists envisaged. So after the foundation of the Republic of Turkey, the founding fathers had a close relationship with the Soviets to establish an urbanistic approach to industrial development. Authored by a Soviet architect, for instance, a Sümerbank cotton mill was built up as a productive campus, so to say, that involved a series of public facilities, including housing, social centers, movie house, pool, sport fields, and so on. Likewise, Nazilli cotton print factory was based on the same model that included craft workshops, galleries, theater hall, community gardens, and stores. So with all the social programs involved, the factory itself was such a nucleus of a new settlement, though not disconnected from the existing township with a direct transit linkage to the city. Then the campus turned out to be the generator of the further industrial and urban development within its vicinity.
So against this background, we are trying to discuss the context for Turkish industrial areas. And this is basically what an industrial zone in Turkey looks like. I guess quite a bit different from what we've seen, for example, from Long Island. This is what we call the organized industrial zones. And this picture is from the first of these zones that was established in 1960s. And as you can see, it's basically neighboring with the city now. In the past, when they were first established, they were in the periphery of the urban areas. But now the industry has grown and also the city has grown towards each other, but they are quite two separate entities. So to what extent this separation will be turned into an integration is an interesting and intriguing question for all of us that we're trying to address in the studio. These industrial zones, all of them provide the essential infrastructure services like electricity, treatment, and natural gas. And as I'll try to emphasize in a minute, they're detached institutionally from the municipality. So they are these industrial zones, I mean, the governance-wise, they are run by themselves through the Ministry of Industry. And in most cases, they have not much to do with the municipality, which makes this integration issue quite a bit complicated for the Turkish case. Let's go on to the next slide. Just a few numbers. These industrial zones provide almost half of all industrial activity in the country. So they're quite important in terms of the economy. But OIZs are not the only type of zones. There are free trade zones and technology development zones. But in terms of numbers, OIZs basically dominate the scene. Maybe we could skip this, but just one point about the governance structure of the OIZs. They are run by the business people themselves in almost most cases for especially the larger industrial zones. The ministry provides the oversight, but the zone development leadership strategy is done by local entities and what's it called? The General Assembly. And the zone directorates, which function like the municipality, in some cases have staff of, for example, 400, 500 people. So these are entities with big capacity and they act like the municipalities of these industrial areas. There are some issues, there are some problems that we are discussing as part of the policy discussions, as well as part of what sort of spatial solutions could be found. But one is about this short-termism. There are long-term challenges. There are mega trends that are affecting the space, as we have heard from many different presentations today. But these are not currently addressed sufficiently at the local level for these industrial zones, which are in most cases, as I said, self-governed. Let's go on to the next slide. And this peculiarity for the Turkish case is this relationship between OIZs and municipalities, which, as I said, make the problem more complex for our case. The one symptom of this separation, for example, is this public transport issue. The people who are working in these zones are not benefiting from public transport options, which are supposed to be provided by municipalities. And each factory is providing its own transport solution through, shuttle buses, through services. And this is a, high emission, high cost solution, which is due to this divorce, this separation between these two. There are, and this has been discussed several times throughout the symposium, there are trends like Industry 4.0, new technologies, the demand coming from new generations, the increasing share of white collar workers. So these are putting pressure on the space, and new solutions are needed, but the discussion is basically ongoing at the moment, because the existing paradigm was designed for a different type of industrial activity, for a different type of business model. But as the business model changes, to what extent these spatial areas will be accommodating or responding to these challenges is an important question. Some data from an earlier study that we had conducted with UNDP. In terms of productivity, these zones serve their purpose. The factories, the business owners are quite happy with these zones in terms of their impact on productivity. But for example, when it comes to the impact on innovation, these are quite limited places. So as the industry faces the challenge of becoming more innovative, these zones need to accommodate and change their business model. And there are some efforts towards this in terms of establishing innovation centers in oases. But from the spatial point of view, how the space could complement this institutional effort is again on the table to be further explored. So the future of oases, in our opinion, will require adding new layers institutionally, but also spatially. The obvious foundational layer is the land infrastructure, the connectivity issues. But in addition to this, how this space will be attracting and retaining the talent, the upskilling and reskilling of workers, which has been discussed in previous sessions. These are all are important issues. In addition to this industrial symbiosis, as we discussed also, environmental friendly production, competitive transformation for further digitalization. So these will be the new layers, and how space will be accommodating this is something we're trying to explore in this studio.
Well, actually, such a prospective transformation that Esen addressed for the industrial zones in Turkey cannot be considered independently from the global trends towards the reindustrialization of the central economies, especially for the last 20 years, as clearly discussed by Professor Eraydın in morning session. So following the prevailing discourse of the Industry 4.0, which simply implies the transformation of industry from digital to computational or cyber domain of production, let's say, the industry itself has been urbanized, unprecedentedly in the way of repositioning itself within the very body of the city. Then again, with the increasing need for the skilled labor, the intrinsic quality of the city and urban life became the key factor for a better of industrialization, industrial transformation itself. As a matter of fact, the ever-enhancing relationship between the city and industry has already been reflected on the literature, calling for a stronger, coalescence between urbanism and industrialism, so to say. You see some previous publications emphasizing such a need for an integration between design and policy on that issue. Such an operational tendency actually has not only emerged in the field of urban design, but also in architectural design. So many design research programs, as we discussed, within the presentation of İlayda and Esen, set their agenda to come up with some architectural typologies accommodating various productive facilities. So after all, such an intellectual focus of architecture and planning in architecture and planning has ended up with another type of urbanism. With the pioneering literature on discussing architectural and urban design through its social, economic, and political dimensions, we can talk about an already established designerly perspective to the issue. Within that context, in 2019, we conducted our own multidisciplinary studio in collaboration with Policy Analytics Lab as the graduate studios at METU, Faculty of Architecture, under the title of Industrial Urbanism. So for our design research, we selected two oases in Ankara, Turkey. While the first one was located within the very fabric of the city, Ostim OSB. The second was in the outer periphery of the city, generating its own residential areas in its vicinity. Then designing the multifunctional and livable industrial districts was specified as the major motivation for the studio, under the overarching research question of how manufacturing will look like in the city of tomorrow. So making alternative statements for the new urban industry by formulating new proximity relations between living and working through mixed and hybrid spatial compositions has been the main question to be elaborated further by design. Then within a semester, the studio was conducted by a series of works, such as design workshops. In the first instance, we set the students' minds free to come up with some alternative conceptual models, basically, and freely, which in turn will be further represented by the futuristic imaginations for the industrial integration and transformation of the cities. Then the site visits made in the selected industrial zones have been quite interesting for the urbanists and architects who had rarely experienced the industrial space within their former education. Though, you know, we just tend to make some projects for the common generic urban areas like residential areas, city centers, recreational zones, and so on. We rarely consider the transformation of industrial areas in architectural and urban scale context, urban context. Then following a series of seminars and thematic lectures, the design studies could be conducted on a relatively strong conceptual basis. The final review at the end was such a learning environment for us, with the participation of the industrialist managers from the organized industrial zones. So we conducted a very generative, I would say, discussions based on the projects suggested by the students. So I would like to briefly give some information about the projects themselves and some aspects raised within those projects, like designing the liminalities between urban and industrial spaces. So some kind of ephemeral conditions which would create such an opportunity to come up with some unprecedented integration of industrial and urban programs. Creating the programmatic axis of integration in the form of multifunctional architectural and spatial compositions. Or developing a generative approach to the diverse production patterns within the industrial fabric. Because when we delved into the very fabric of the industrial sites, we recognized a series of different typologies which in turn encounter different transformational patterns. Considering both typological and sociological dimensions of the industrial transformation based on different persona, different user profiles to be involved within those production processes. Responding to the very incremental nature of industrial districts located within the city itself, used to develop through small entrepreneurships based on a coding system that was slightly discussed by Professor Hatuka today, supporting some symbiotic relationships between the distinct production facilities, because we recognize that rather than suggesting a kind of total master planning approach to steer some kind of generative local interactions between the companies, small companies, would end up with a much more stronger symbiotic relationships within those areas. So you see how the different programmatic layers will be integrated within the existing fabric through different experimentation of the productive space itself. Or turning the conventional notion of development corridor, which is so common in planning literature, into an ecological tool to consolidate the productive relationship between the agriculture and industry. In this case, the group was asked to relate different poles of industrial developments throughout a singular programmatic axis called the corridor. Or ensuring the integration of the partial industrial developments, either by a new transportation infrastructure or via a series of programmatic clustering. So following the first application of the concept in 2019, this year we are now revisiting the idea of the idea of industrial urbanism with some complementary questions towards a holistic view on the issue. Then we recognize that there are still many aspects, to be explored by design. To that end, we tended to contribute to the international institutionalization of the discourse by establishing the Turkish branch of industrial urbanism. So to provide an operational view for supporting the industrial development of the cities while ensuring good urbanism, effective planning strategies, and responsive architecture. Before finishing, we thank all the sponsors who have supported our design education so far. And of course, the students who put a great effort to contribute to industrial urbanism by design. Without their own efforts and intellectual engagement, it would have been impossible to discuss on that issues within our own context. So thank you very much for listening. And we will be so glad to receive your questions as well. Thank you. I think it's already got very late, specifically in Turkey and the continental Europe. Oh, all right. We have questions at chat box, right? Merhaba hocam. Öncelikle profesyonel geçen sempozyum için teşekkür ederim. Austin Teknik Üniversitesi Mimarlık Fakültesi.
Thank you for this professional
Thank you very much for this remark. A question we received. We are talking about the necessity of combining OIZs with the urban fabric. But when the cities cannot even find a solution to the pollution created by organized industrial zones, how ecologically logical is to physically bring these two different textures together? Esen Hocam, would you like to respond on that? Or
very quickly, I think that's a very relevant question. For this integration to take place, I think, as mentioned in the previous sessions, there are prerequisites, and cleanliness and the quietness of the industrial activity are important prerequisites, in my opinion. But I'm quite optimistic. At the moment, yes, I mean, this is a challenge because not all in this industrial activity is clean and quiet in most industrial parks. However, the new agenda, particularly the green transformation, the net emission zero goals, and the green OIZ initiatives, which are taking off quite rapidly, not unfortunately due to internal factors, but the external pressure we're receiving through our integration with the European Union market. And they are putting the pressure for us to lower our emissions. And this will reform the productive space forcefully in the near future. So there will be more opportunities for this integration because the industry has to be clean to survive. Non-clean industrial modes of production will not be able to survive as long as they want to continue exporting to other markets.
Thank you very much for the question, Mohammed. I think it's quite a detailed answer. Thank you very much, Esen Hocam. Thank you, Funda, for your remarks too.
Feridun Hocam has a question, I think.
Perfect. Please, Hocam. Please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, can I speak Turkish now?
Sure.
Teşekkür ederim. Ben soru sormayacağım da.
I'm not going to have a question, but I've been part of those juries invited by Olgu back in 2009, I think. And also, my friend Esen also talked about the organized industrial zones. But in Turkey currently, if you look at the industrial zones, this basically started a long time ago. So the difference between the organized industrial zones and the industrial zone is quite important because organized industrial zones has no attachment with the municipality. However, the industrial zones are under the auspices of the Ministry of Industry. So although organized industrial zones are under the presidency of the local government, the industrial zones are under the central government, and the law is changing constantly. Certain facilitations for certain incentives are appearing. So industrial zones now becoming much more popular compared to the organized industrial zones. So that's a difference, and we have to really note that difference. The organized industrial zones are local, while industrial zones are completely in the control of the ministry under the central government, basically. I just wanted to make a comment on this. And in 2017, lots of new regulations have been made, and I just wanted to inform our friends in the studio.
Speakers could follow in our English channel the translation. So you address a very, I think, a critical problem in terms of the planning the region itself. All right, because it's hardly, a kind of a subject of urban design. The huge tracts of land allocated for as industrial zones, as you said. So the relation, I think, should be set on the policy level too. This is quite an important issue. So there is a kind of dichotomy between industry and the city, which is not the current trend, as we already discussed so far within the sessions. So you are so right to address that criticality. Esen Hocam, would you like to add something about that?
I just wanted to wish good luck for our interpreters, because endüstri bölgesi, as Feridun Hocam said, and sanayi bölgesi, to English, they're basically the same concept, but the nuance should be known by our Turkish experts. And yes, I mean, the endüstri bölgeleri, the unorganized industrial zone, but it's hard to call them unorganized. They are meant for single factory initiatives, or few areas for few factories, whereas OIZs are accommodating hundreds of factories. So that's one of the main differences. And initially, when the law was first passed, the goal was to attract foreign direct investment to these endüstri bölgeleri, whereas OIZs were mostly for domestic producers.
Yeah. Esen, I think this question goes for your specialization. In the industry, asked by Dilşat Karakuş, in industrial layers, you mentioned land first. Land ownership limits some interventions. Do you think it's possible to implement renting system in industrial areas to increase flexibility in interventions?
That's a very good and very insightful remark. Or a question, but that contains a very useful insight. Definitely yes, and I think the system sooner or later will need to accommodate such flexibility, and this long-term leases, leases for about 40, 50 years should be an option, and there have been efforts for this. But also, if you know the political economy of this, it's hard to convince against owning the land, because when you look at the trends, maybe the value of the companies, value of the factories are not increasing that much because of the not so sophisticated industrial activities, but the value of the land in most cases, especially if they're in metropolitan areas, increases much faster than the factory itself. The land becomes more valuable than the machines and the organization above it. So business people want to hold on to the land as sort of a security for their retirement. So it would be hard to convince against this political, economic, historical, or sociological aspect. But why not? Especially as the mode of production becomes more sophisticated, as technology level goes up, such solutions will definitely need to be experimented with.
Perfect. Now I think it's time to close up the session. And I would like to ask the participants, Sinan Bey or Yılmaz Bey, and all the other presenters, if they have any concluding remarks before finishing.
Okay, stop. Well, I would like to thank you, first of all, for curating this symposium, which I think was very insightful and fresh, and I personally learned a lot, and there's for me a lot of things to digest. I'm sure we're going to discuss a lot of things that we heard today, and maybe also develop some ideas on furthermore on our Istanbul platform, and maybe in the future we can go back and then talk about these issues together again. And I think all the presentations today were like so sophisticated and deep. They deserve to be keynote lectures themselves. That gave me the idea, maybe in the coming months or years, we can have those presentations as on separate or conferences, maybe, I don't know, or lectures, or together organize something together around this topic. because I think the topic is very globally very important and present. I mean, it's just we have to keep talking about it, I think, discussing. So thank you very much to you and to all the presenters and to our guests, to audiences to be here with us today all day long. And again, I hope we can do another episode of this next year or something. Olgu. Thank you, Sen Hocam, for your very supportive attitude towards us and your support during this the organization of that symposium. Then I would like to ask Nina or Marie if still there, Merve, whether they have remarks on that symposium or not.
Yes, I just would like to thank everyone as well. And it's really wonderful to see this expanded audience and practitioners in the field working on urban industry. And I hope perhaps maybe you can all join me in mid-April 2020 in Brussels for the opening of my exhibition. Vertical Urban Factory is still traveling. And we are planning some panel discussions. So we'll all be in touch and perhaps some of you can also participate. So thank you so much for hosting and for the very well-organized virtual conference.
Thank you for your contribution, Nina. Very appreciated. Marie?
Yeah, Olgu, I just wanted to say thank you as well for the invitation to the conference. And it's been a real pleasure to see how industrial activities are being looked at other parts of the world and your efforts to kind of bring together thinkers on this matter across geography. It's really a unique opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution.
One last remark. I think it was a really nice winter day, a Saturday afternoon in Istanbul, and despite that fact, I think we have more than 500 viewers already, maybe if not more so far by this hour. And I think it will be much more in coming days. So it's very impactful. Thank you very much again.
Yeah, it has been so glad. We are so glad to have such audience. Thank you so much. Yeah. All right. Have a nice weekend and thank you for coming. See you.